Okay. All right. So, good morning. Sorry for the confusion. Sorry about the wrong file that I sent you. I had it in my head that we're still, doesn't matter. And yesterday we were involved in, we were outside in honor of today, which is Tu B'Shvat, kind of the anniversary, the tree anniversary, the annual Arbor Day, Jewish Arbor Day is today. It's not a very significant holiday by any means, but it's and it has an interesting history because it had nothing to do with what it became. What it became in the 20th century was a day for planting trees, and what it became in the 1970s onwards was kind of a Jewish Earth Day. And at Or Midbar, we celebrated this year by going out for a hike or Torah trek, what we call a Torah trek, with sources in hand. And if you see that in the future, for those of you that are in Palm Springs and don't do things with our community on a regular basis, this is something which is it's rather unique. We take a theme, and the theme yesterday was the parable of Jotham, or Yotham's parable in Judges, because it's one of the relatively rare biblical passages that use nature. Maybe it's not so rare in Psalms quite a bit, but it's an interesting passage from Judges 9. The context is less important, but the parable that is used is about trees. That way, it's very similar to the parables in the Gospels, right? Using nature and real life. In any case, I'm rambling. We did that, and then we looked at a number of different commentaries on that parable as we walked around in this nature reserve and tried to learn about leadership in ourselves from the trees themselves. And so I'm a little confused. I'm not. Okay, so the text sheet that was sent out today is just the very short chapter in Hebrew and English, and what is in your chat box right now is an additional sheet. It's the same first sheet, but I added another sheet. I don't expect people to print it up now, and I'll throw it up on the screen for when we get there. I want to talk about a particular phrase in this passage, and assuming we have time. Okay, are there any comments or questions about what we did in the past, or somebody would like to bring up in general? Okay, as I do during this last 3.5 months, I do mention that our study is hopefully lifting up our souls a little bit from the darkness and the depression of the war in Israel and Gaza, Israel and Palestine. I wish I could say things are looking up. They're not looking up, in my opinion. They're looking in some ways worse than they were last week and the week before. Not everything gets to American media, but the political situation inside of Israel is definitely getting worse and worse. And it's still going to take some time. And here for many of us in the United States, situation seems to be looking a little grimmer. So we look to the words of wisdom in the past to possibly find some hope in the words of this prophet who came to bring hope. Okay, so shall we begin? Richard, you with us now? Would you like to read today?
No, I'm still kind of
Okay, hands off. Okay.
Yeah.
So Terry, good to have you back here.
Yeah, it's nice to be here, and it's actually 10 o'clock for us instead of 1 o'clock. So, do you want me to read the 1 through 3 or just?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Thus said God, where is the bill of divorce of your mother whom I dismissed? And which of my creditors was it to whom I sold you off? You were only sold off for your sins, and your mother dismissed for your crimes. Why, when I came, was no one there? Why, when I called, would none respond? Is my arm then too short to rescue? Have I not the power to save? With a mere rebuke, I dry up the sea and turn rivers into desert. Their fish stink from lack of water. They lie dead of thirst. I clothe the skies in blackness and make their raiment sackcloth.
So it's unfair because usually you'd have this text the day before and usually, Terry, you'd have questions. But
It's very grim,
Hmm.
to read it. It's a very grim statement.
Mhm. I think we were introduced to this theme of adultery and last week, of course, it's not new to Isaiah. One of the things we said last week was, or maybe the time before, is that it's clear from this material just how late Isaiah, this part, second Isaiah, is utilizing previous materials, previous prophetic works. In this particular paragraph, I see two that are very distinct. One is that it's not word for word, but it's very, very similar to the beginning of Hosea, of Hosea. We mentioned that, or Hosea, I don't know how that's pronounced in English, which we mentioned last week. But the second part of this about the drying up of the fish stinking from the lack of water is very reminiscent of a prophecy of Ezekiel against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who likens himself to the Nile River. And you know what? You think you're a Nile River? I'm going to dry you up, says God, and the fish are going to stink and cling to you. And he calls him a crocodile as well, or not a crocodile, an alligator, or whatever the ones that are in Egypt are. And so it's really clear to see that this prophet, this writer is building on the previous writings. What's the newness though of this passage? So what do we learn in this passage? Perhaps we didn't learn in other passages, or other comments or questions.
The first column is saying to me, hey, nobody's listening. Why not? Stop paying attention to me. And the second column is saying, here's a reminder what I can do if I want to.
One thing we might say is there's not really a chronological, it's not a linear development in this part of Isaiah, in second Isaiah. We don't seem to be, we get thrown back to other things that were said beforehand in the material we've been doing over the last few months. One of them is that emphasis, I need you to listen. That's going to come up, ear and language is going to come up, something I hope maybe we can speak about at greater length. This idea of listening, the prophet, as many prophets do, are complaining, people, you're not hearing me, you're not listening to me. Unfortunately, I see the same things today in much of the Jewish world. Just in particular, that people are convinced, especially American Jews who are convinced that there's nothing wrong with Israel, is what you often hear is we need to educate them. They need to hear, they need to know the real story, as if everything is just black and white, and if they only knew our side of it. But you're not hearing me, you're not listening to me. Yeah. I guess human beings have been doing that for hundreds of years. Steve, help me out. Help us out here, Steve. Lift us up a little bit into. I feel we've brought everybody down a little.
Well, I'm just trying to make sense of this metaphor of the bill of divorce and the creditors. Is he saying that look, have I divorced you? No. Were you sold off? No. Yes, you sinned, but why, when I came, was no one there? Why, when I called, would none respond? And then there's a little snarkiness in that second column. I don't have the power to save, or what? What are you thinking? Why aren't you listening? Because there's a motive for trust given here in some way.
Yeah, yes, Don.
Yeah, I must say that when I read Isaiah, I have a kind of a context of a Christian connection, and I think that blocks me a little bit. But what I do know too is that in the Hebrew scriptures, there is this thing about marriage between Israel and God, and also there is a thing, a metaphor about children too. So as just to describe the intimate relationship between God and Israel.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is something I think you bring up quite often, Don. Thank you, but I want to relate to your opening statement as you think you've been too influenced by Christian reading, and that's exactly why we're doing this. We want to hear, we want to exchange. But so, could you say more about from a Christian point of view how you
Well,
would understand this?
I could only say in retrospect to perhaps chapter 49 that the reference to the servant being a reference to Jesus, and that's really powerful during some of the Christian holy days. Powerful in the sense that it's done by repetition and explanation too, in the reading of the scriptures. That's about what I can say.
Okay. Anybody else?
And I think that one other thing is that this whole concept of divorce in Deuteronomy is sets out or puts some flesh on what we're reading in verses 1 through 3 here. When a man divorces a woman or a woman seeks a divorce, it's explained pretty thoroughly in Deuteronomy, so that when we look and just see a phrase like a bill of divorce, you say to yourself, "What? Where did that come from?"
Okay. All right. So let me address that a little bit. Where it comes from is in particular the beginning of Hosea the prophet, who goes into great detail about telling the prophet to act out this relationship, this metaphorical relationship between God and the people of Israel. Take a wife who's a prostitute and then divorce her. And yes, it is based, much of it is based on that language we have in Deuteronomy that you've been referring to. So let's talk first about Deuteronomy and then see how we can superimpose that on the metaphor that's used between the relationship between God and the people of Israel. In Deuteronomy, there is something which is at the time was progressive. It was progressive, and Don, it was only a man wanting to divorce his wife. Unfortunately, it was not a woman seeking a divorce. That's something that developed much later, even post-rabbinic times, and even now is not equal in Orthodox law, which is also the law of the state of Israel in some cases. But what does the book of Deuteronomy say? That if a man is going to send away his wife, he's got to give her a sefer kritut or a get kritut. And that's the word in Hebrew here, which means a bill of cutting off. Lichrot is to cut. Ironically, it's the same thing, the same verb that's used when you cut the end off of a little boy's penis, right? It's the same word, krita, lichrot brit. And to cut, we've talked about before, to cut a deal in the English, that's what it would reflect. And it's progressive because until that moment, at least in legal history, at least in our legal history, a man could send his wife away back to her parents and then say, okay, come back, then send her away. Okay, come back. Could do yo-yo. And what the progress here, from at least from a gender equality point of view, is that if he says no, then that's the end. You can't play. It's got to be. It's done, and that's it. In later Jewish law, you cannot remarry a woman who's been divorced and then been with another man. You can't remarry. You can remarry her if she hasn't been with another man. And but the idea here is that it's final. It's a final thing, and that's why the bill of divorce and what Steve said before. I did send you away, but it wasn't a final decision kind of a thing. And that's bringing it back to the metaphor that's being used here. Yeah, but and the metaphor of a divorce decree is apt because it is unfair. It is not equal. Because she cannot come and say, I want to do the same thing. In biblical law, only the man can do it in the same way that only God can really say, not the way we understand today that humanity can disengage themselves from God, but in that case, only God can disengage himself from humanity. It's not reciprocal. Anything else? Okay, Don, do you want to read 4 to 9 for us?
Sure. My sovereign God gave me a skilled tongue to know how to speak timely words to the weary. Morning by morning, God rouses me, rousing my ear to give heed like disciples. My sovereign God opened my ears, and I did not disobey. I did not run away. I offered my back to the floggers and my cheek to those who tore out my hair. I did not hide my face from insult and spittle, but my sovereign God will help me. Therefore, I feel no disgrace. Therefore, I have set my face like flint, and I know I shall not be shamed. My vindicator is at hand, who dares contend with me. Let us stand up together. Who would be my opponent? Let them approach me. Lo, my sovereign God will help me. Who can get a verdict against me? They shall wear out like a garment. The moth shall consume them.
Comments, questions?
It's like
I
a
just
psalm
want to
on
note that this
steroids.
is the third of 4 servant passages. The fourth and final being in 53, where the servant is acutely suffering. But yeah, this is a provocative piece of text, if you ask me. I mean, my beard is plucked, I'm spit upon, but I feel no disgrace. So this servant has that kind of trust that was rhetorically asked for in the first 3 verses of this chapter. It's like, hey, y'all aren't listening. How come you're not responding to my call? Which in and of itself is very provocative, for this group of people to be in a foreign land and as slaves without power, and then to have this provocative promise made and kind of a rebuke for not hearing it. And then when one does hear it, it's costly, and it creates resistance of some kind. And yet there's a feeling of confidence, of vindication, and that those who are against me, they'll fade anyway. So that's all I wanted to say.
Harry, it looks like you've got something on the tip of your skilled tongue.
No, these are really hard. It almost seems like, there's this awful stuff going on to this servant. And how could there be this hope that everything's going to be okay? The enemies are the ones that'll wear out like a garment, and the moth shall consume them. We see this over and over in scripture, and like it really doesn't happen that way. I'm reading a lot of the Psalms right now, and it's the same kind of thing, a prayer to, save me from my enemies, and I'm going to be true to God. And but it means vindication. That's sort of the victory is always vindication. The enemies suffer, But here the servant is suffering, and so waiting for my turn to rise up and to, to feel no disgrace at all of this awful stuff that's going on.
It's sort of reminiscent of the book of Job as well. Well, I don't see the vindication in Job, but like Terry says, the Psalms in a way that, okay, I suffer tremendous calamities, but I've still got this faith, and you're not going to shake it.
The vindication in Job is that from a very Job-centric point of view, he gets everything back at the end.
Yeah.
It doesn't help for the others. But Don, just before, and I think Dan, you were about to say something beforehand. Did I not see you?
Yeah. Terry referred to feeling like Psalms. I had that feeling too, but as I start to say, like a Psalm on steroids, because the language is so, I want to say vicious, go from my back to the floggers, tore out my hair, I got spit on. This is not afflictions of the soul. Somebody's really being persecuted for standing up.
Yeah, and for standing up, precisely, it's like, it's because of the servant's obedience that he does respond to the voice of God, that he is then persecuted.
Don?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when you feel down, beaten down, this is a beautiful prayer. And secondly, a number of people that I know have cancer of one kind or another, and they are always so positive. And Terry, I in my heart of hearts, I can't understand why they're so positive, but they do. They put on this front, and that's a bad word, but they put on this appearance that they're okay and that things are going to be okay. And it's remarkable to me that I see that, but I just make an analogy between that portrayal of how one feels with this psalm. I could see that person with cancer saying this psalm when he's sitting in his chair or her chair at night before he or she goes to bed, making that a prayer for help.
So I want to make a few comments on the language and from a literary point of view. But first, just on the language, I missed one, but I put in bold the 3 times out of the 4 times. It's at the bottom of the first column as well. The word "my sovereign God," and that kind of brings together that this is my sovereign God section. That's what I would call this particular poem, if you will. I think everybody understands. I'll just point out, though, unlike the first passage we did, the first paragraph we did, it's "thus said God," right? Ko amar Adonai. That's a quote from what God said to the prophet. This is the prophet himself, right? That I think everybody's clear on that. The prophet himself was speaking, and he starts with the words, what are in English, "my sovereign God." In Hebrew, that is, you see in Hebrew, for those that can, Aleph Daled Nun Yud, which is Adoni or Adonai, but Adoni, which is my Lord, and that it's spelled out that way. We usually say that name for what is spelled out Yahweh, Yud He Vav He, because we don't say, in our tradition, we don't use that name. It's only reserved for the temple, and and since the temple is destroyed, rabbinic literature didn't even say Adonai. Rabbinic literature, they said Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. And so what you have here is a very personal relationship. It's not that. And previously, the narrator said, "Ko amar Adonai." This is what Yahweh. This is what Yahweh said. Here it is, "My Lord Yahweh." It's a much more personal, it's a stronger commitment. And that fourfold usage of this, as I say, I missed putting the one at the bottom in bold, brings this section together. It's very personal. What is the basis, or what is the essence of that personal relationship that the prophet here is sharing with the people, which apparently is not like what the people are feeling themselves? Is that it starts with, he was given a skilled tongue, lashon limudim. I wouldn't have maybe picked up on this, but I have a very close friend who I've known. We were in seminary together. We were roommates, and I've known him for the years. He's remained Orthodox, and he lives in one of the settlements, but in one of the settlements very, very close to Jerusalem. And I've seen him move politically. He was extremely right-wing, younger, but we are on very good terms, unlike some of my relations with some people I know before. And so I've known him now for 50 years, a little short of 50 years. And he studied Talmud at Hebrew University when I was studying Bible. And he started a typesetting company when it was first just starting how you could do these things on computers. And he called his company Lashon Limudim, a skilled tongue. Lashon Limudim, because he knows he's very good at language. When I have questions in biblical grammar and things like that, I ask him. He's very, very good. Wonderful sense of humor. So this stood out to me right away, and I brought some commentaries that I wasn't familiar with on this additional page that I added into the chat. We'll get to that, and maybe we'll just finish the biblical text first. But then I saw it's not just about the tongue. There's the tongue, and then there's the ears that are mentioned here. It's not just about the face. So tongue and face being positive body parts that are being used in this part reality, part metaphor here, but it's also it's the tongue and the face, but on the other side of that, it's the ears and the back and the hair, right? The ears are plugged, the back and the hair are tormented. There's kind of seems to me this almost dualism kind of going on, and yes, Dan, this sounds traumatic. Sounds like it's only somebody who felt this with their body would write this way, right? But utilizes that experience, that traumatic experience, to talk about his mission in life. The servant here, he's been given a job, and his job is to get the message to the people, and his job is to get it into their ears. Their ears are plugged. His ears are open. His tongue has been enabled. Got to get that message into the ears. His back has been flogged. His hair has been torn out. He's got to get them back to there too. He's got to get them back to the face. And the face here is the face of God. This relationship between God and the human being, having that face, is something that the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas talks about in the 20th century. This relationship and understanding the face of human beings. Then that's kind of this is what I see here. This double side. Any comments or reactions or further?
Well, again, it's this suffering is precisely because he did not run away, that he heard and obeyed. And then this idea of offering his back to the floggers, this kind of a non-violent resistance approach, where he's there with the enemy, but come at me. You can't kill me. You can kill me, but I'm still vindicated. And so there's kind of a fearless confidence and humility that is very powerful in the way it's expressed here.
I like that. It's kind of like a Martin Luther King thing, or a Mahatma Gandhi thing.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, because it struck me in light of this text, yesterday, a friend of mine showed me a PBS Frontline special that came out in 2002, and then it was reissued right after October 7th of this past year. And it's called The Road to Oslo, and it features Shimon Peres when after the accord was secured, then of course Rabin is assassinated by a far right Israeli, And then that creates all kinds of chaos all over again. And then come the bus bombings and the violence in the way they told this story. And then almost overnight, because of that violence, Perez was, persecuted. Everybody just went after him tooth and nail as a traitor to Israel for even speaking to Arafat and the Palestinians. And so, I thought of Perez as an instance possibly of these verses. I don't know if that holds up because I don't know that full story or the history, but what I saw, it felt like he had an integrity that was rejected in light of, the fact that it fell apart and he got blamed.
Yeah, that blame is still being used today. There are people that are, you'll see quotes now in recent weeks, even the other day. Anybody who thought a two-state solution was remotely possible before October 7th, this is a quote, this is not me, remotely possible before October 7th, now knows, of course they understand now, it'll never be possible, right? And there was, someone I know, an American who lives in a place called Tekoa, which is in the West Bank. It's not that far from Bethlehem, and he's a musician. We've worked together over the years. We've done things together, and he wrote in the first few days that he expects everybody in the government who was part of the evacuation or the pullout from Gaza Strip in 2000, whenever it was, 2004 or whatever. Expects an apology from each of them, an apology because this is what happened. This kind of understanding what's happened right now, exactly the opposite, right? And so Peres as well. Peres was is one of the in many ways one of the most tragic figures in Israeli history, because he was never became prime minister, really, right? He never was considered a successful leader, although he was probably one of the smartest people we ever had, and had experienced it all, been in all parts, except for he was never an officer in the army. He was never in the army. He worked in the defense establishment. But there's an arc to him. He understood. He went from being what most Israelis were to being very, very peace-seeking. And tragic, and remained an eloquent speaker and intellectual to the very end. Cicero's a reader. I mean, yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I need to think more about, who would this be then? In my mind, I totally hear what you're saying, Stephen. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not focused enough today. I'm not getting my tongue is poorly skilled today. My ears and my hair. Okay. All right. Anything else on this particular passage before we go on, and then we'll take a deeper look into what the skilled tongue phrase is fueled. Okay. So Jim, you want to read the 10 to 11 for us?
Sure. Who among you reveres God and heeds the voice of the appointed servant? Though walking in darkness and having no light, let them trust in the name of God and rely upon his God. But you are all kindlers of fire, girding on firebrands. Walk by the blaze of your fire, by the brands that you have lit. This has come to you from my hand. You shall lie down in pain.
This is rather mystical.
Yeah, my ears are plugged on that one.
Yeah. I'm I can't really make heads or tails of this, to tell you the truth. I mean, I understand in general, it's one last lashing out at the people who are not listening to him, but I'm not really sure how to understand the, you know, are you walking in fire? What exactly? You have, I don't know. What do you say, Steve?
Oh, I just think it's, well, the first one, though walking in darkness and having no light, let them trust in the name of God, even those whose ears are plugged. You know, it's kind of another appeal, another motivation to trust. But you are all kindlers of fire. I take that as kind of a violence, girding on firebrands, just constitutionally violent, walking by the blaze of your fire, by the brands that you have lit. This has come to you from my hand. And in that last part, I just don't know what that means. You shall lie down in pain. Maybe as a prophecy that you'll be punished by that violence. But also with an appeal to even you wake up, trust, stand up in right relationship to God. So I don't know. It's a bit puzzling, but that's what I make of it.
Steve, can I read from a text on the book of Isaiah about these verses 10 and 11? There's a widespread agreement that verses 10 and 11 constitute a separate oracle from that which precedes. The servant is no longer the speaker, but one spoken about. In a literary development, much like the extension of 49:7, once again, there is a commentary-like addition in verse 10 and 11, that preceding servant song, which seeks to draw out the implications of that which occurred. Moreover, once again, the tone of the extension reflects a certain sense of distance from the events and appears to share the wider perspective of the larger literary content, including perhaps chapter 53. The initial difficulty in interpreting the unit turns on a syntactical problem of relating various clauses to one another. The problem has been pursued in great length by Buchan, Beuken. The first, they give three options, which I won't go into unless you want to hear it. But there is some confusion about this section, and there's some interpretation too.
So Don, you're being a prophet of comfort, right? You're giving us comfort in the fact that if we're confused, it's all right. We're in good company. Yeah. One thought that I have is perhaps that the double usage of fire, the double usage of a lot of things here. A skilled tongue can be used for good and bad. Ears can be used to listen, to be stopped up. I mean, and maybe the fire, I don't know, maybe there's something about fire on one hand is something that can light up the way, but it can also be very destructive. So I'd like to take a look in the time that we have at if you could. I'm going to put it on screen. You have it in the chat box. If you double click on it, then you'll have it in your computer or on your pad, whatever, and you can look at it afterwards. I apologize, and we'll add this to whatever Madalena sends out that has the recording and the previous text. But I'm going to throw it up on screen right now. So these are not in chronological order, although the first one is the earliest one, Philo of Alexandria. We've seen his words before, first century, around the time of Jesus. Very Jewish, Jewish philosopher, Hellenistically Jewish, but relatively unknown in normative Judaism, right? It wasn't really until I think until the late 19th century that many Jewish scholars began to deal with Philo, writes in Greek. It's Yeah, so why don't we begin with this? Oh, Megan, did you want to say something before? And now that I was about to call you, but I think I remember you wanted to say something.
I've sort of forgotten the line of my thinking as I
Oh,
was
okay.
listening to everybody else, but from the very beginning of this, and even to the last one, it's like, God first says, why aren't you trusting me? This is what's going to happen to you. Then the prophet says, I do hear, I can speak, I can listen, I can take all of the, it's almost being an example to the people that you can be horribly abused, horribly, but you're gonna make it because of our sovereign God.
Mm.
Then the last one, the light of fire is being used improperly, and instead of lighting up for wisdom or hearing or speaking, people are walking on it and using it, and then they're gonna lie down in pain, and it's sort of but it seems to me, trying to teach people you can go through all of this as I am doing.
Hmm.
But anyway, I
Lovely.
thought that a while back before I heard everything else. Yeah.
Great, lovely. Okay, if you could read the first passage from Philo for us.
Thou hast given me a tongue of instruction that I know now when I should speak. Isaiah 54. My mouth that was knitted up, thou hast unsewn. And when thou hast opened it, thou didst strengthen its nerves for speech. Thou hast taught me to say what should be said, confirming the oracle. I will open thy mouth and teach thee what thou shalt speak. Ezekiel 4:12.
Let's take a look at that, and I'll stop the share in a second so we can look at each other. And again, if you want to see this, you can just double click it if you can toggle between this screen, the Zoom screen, and the text. Any comments or insights on Philo?
So these are Philo's words. You know, I'm trying to get the context because he's
Right,
doing a lot of quoting.
yeah, so Philo first quotes here what we read. It's just a different translation. Okay, but that's what we read. Thou hast given me a tongue of instruction, lashon limudim, right? Or a wise tongue, whatever. What do we say here? A skilled tongue. And then all this language here, which looks like it's biblical English, because the translator, whoever did it, I don't know if it's Wolfson, I don't know, whoever did it, just used that. It's Philo speaking, right? Just in Old English. First of all, there's the mouth was knitted up. You know, think of a mouth being sewn, kind of, a mouth is sewn up and you've been unsewn it, you know, and you've opened it. And not only that, but you had to strengthen the nerves for speech because there was atrophy. The muscles had atrophied, right? And you've taught me you've enabled me, you've undone it being closed, you've strengthened the muscles, then you've told me what to say, and all this is playing out the verse that was said to Moses at the burning bush when Moses says, I'm not a man of words. And God says, I'll tell you what to do. You don't need the words. I'll give you the words. So what Philo is doing is making a direct connection between our prophet here in chapter 50 and Moses. He's spelling it out exactly. He's doing what the rabbis of the Talmud often do, connecting two passages that are common. But in particular, I like this idea that it's not just that my mouth was closed, it was shut closed, it was sewn closed. It's not just that it was sewn closed and it was opened, but I couldn't use the muscles. God strengthens the muscle. And then it's not only that I couldn't use the muscles and now I can speak, but what am I going to say? It's the epitome of the prophet as the literal mouthpiece of God. Okay, I see people are less excited by it than I was. Okay. All right, Dan, why don't you do the next section from it? This is from Maimonides, Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Guide for the Perplexed. At the time, over the generations, had not in modern times so much. Well, in the ultra-Orthodox world, this is not a text which is studied in medieval. This was a book that was burned by Jews. Yes, Jews sometimes burned other Jews' books. It was considered to be heretical. It was a little bit too rational for when it was written. In any case, most of the most interesting parts are in part 3 of the Guide for Perplexed. And let's see what he has to say. Go ahead.
You know how we condemn lowness of speech, and justly so. For speech is likewise peculiar to man, and a boon which God granted to him, that he may be distinguished from the rest of living creatures. Thus God says, who gave a mouth to man, Exodus, and the prophet declares, the Lord God hath given me a learned tongue, from what we just read. This gift, therefore, which God gave us in order to enable us to perfect ourselves, to learn and to teach, must not be employed in doing that which is for us most degrading and perfectly disgraceful. We must not imitate the songs and tales of ignorant and lascivious people. It may be suitable to them, but it is not fit for those who are told, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Those who employ the faculty of thinking and speaking in the service of that sense which is no honor to us, who think more than necessary of drink and love, or even sing of these things, they employ and use the divine gift in acts of rebellion against the giver, and in the transgression of his commandments. To them the following words may be applied, and I multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal.
Nothing?
Okay,
Comment?
well,
Anybody?
well, he's saying what speech is properly used for. It's a gift of God, and don't use it idly.
Yeah. He's turned our passage from being a lesson in hope and listening to God to far more about how to speak, and what we learn from these different things, what we employ. What is the way of a good person in their speech? Commentary on perhaps what would be secular society. Rita Claire?
I thought this was very interesting, the fact that, yes, I never thought about that distinguishes us from other creations of God, that we are able to speak to one another, perhaps in different languages, but we can still speak to one another. And what phrase keeps popping up in my head is a simple one: think before you speak, because you can't take back what's already been said. And I can't help but relate again to being a parent. And it's, to me, it's almost like the same thing. It's God is our parent. And I think of my own children and how we try to teach them all these things, and we're constantly disappointed. It's an ongoing thing. You have to work at it all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, the thing that just struck me right in the middle of it, he quotes from Exodus, you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. But he's not speaking to everybody. He's got his specific audience in mind.
You don't think he's
Saying it's
speaking
okay
to
for
all
some
Jews?
people, but it's not for you.
But you don't think he's speaking to all Jewish people, Dan?
Well, taking the context of that quote from Exodus, I want to say who's he speaking to in Exodus? He's speaking to the Jews.
Yes, he's speaking to the people. In other words, this is one of those passages that Maimonides could be saying, well, they, the nations, they do this, but we need to be special.
Yeah.
Yeah. But of course, Maimonides learned most of the way that he learned to express. He learned from the wisdom of the nations, from the Greek philosophers that he read in Arabic, from the Arabic philosophers of the time. Yeah. Okay. All right. The other one I'll let you read on your own. I think again I apologize for the confusion and for not being prepared today adequately, but we get through it. We'll get through the next section. I promise to be better prepared next time. Any parting words, comments?
I do. What through all these things we've been doing in Isaiah, I've always had a lot of trouble reading the book and getting much out of it. So I've been going at a different direction as I've been, looking at it as poetry and studying looking at some of the poetic mechanisms used. And it's also reminding me and trying to hear these words aloud in my head of what little experience I have with the cadences of the Black churches, the passion in the languages. And just to note that I just learned today that there's going to be a Henry Louis Gates series on PBS starting in the middle of February, a 4-part documentary on gospel and music in the Black churches.
Mm.
And I'm expecting that'll help give a more feel for the language.
When some of us participated, or I was at least, at the Martin Luther King event at the Methodist Church last week, 3 of us were asked to speak. One was Reverend Dan Klein, who's an Episcopal priest with a good Bible studies background, but spoke very much in the style of what I remember when I was a kid, some conservative rabbi speaking about civil rights, very much, connecting the ideas, but in what I would call a very, I don't know, I could go, but a white American style, if you could. And the person who spoke after me was from an AME church in San Bernardino and spoke very much in what I would associate with an African American style with a lot of emphasis and repetition of words, repetition of verses, and yeah, and also the tone, the volume, the tone, the way. And I was in between, and I spoke in a different way. I sang, where I led them in a chant that they picked up right away, and just focused on one thing. It was more emotional than intellectual. I just remember sitting down or listening, saying, how lovely to see all those 3 styles, totally different styles, or as if somebody, and I get maybe they did understand there would be 3 different styles, totally different styles. That came up, and they're all Divrei Elohim Chaim. They're all the living words of God. I'd like to think they're all so many different ways to express these things. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. All right, everybody. Anything else? Okay.
I enjoyed the discussion. I'd encourage you to remain in a state of partial confusion rather than get too eloquent. I got a lot of things out of it. Just a thought.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate it. I will take that blessing to heart. But we all have our own standards of what we expect from ourselves, and so I have to live up to those as well. All right. Okay. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Very good.
Have a good weekend.